Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today, I've got something really cool to share with you. Before we dive in, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, leave a comment, and share it with your friends. Now let's get started. My name is Alexandra Pierce. I am 34 years old. And I am the only woman who ever walked out of Blake Harrington's marriage alive and unbroken. From the outside, Blake was the American dream wrapped in tailored suits. 45, with steel blue eyes, a jawline sculpted like a Greco statue, and the kind of confidence that made entire rooms fall silent when he walked in. He owned an empire, real estate stretching from Manhattan to Miami, tech investments that dominated Silicon Valley headlines, and an art collection that could make the Louvre jealous. To the world, he was the golden bachelor who had finally given marriage a try. To me, he was something far more dangerous. When I first met him at a charity gala in New York, an event I attended reluctantly, I noticed how people orbited him like moths to a flame. Men wanted to be him. Women wanted to be with him. But there was something hollow in his smile. Something no camera could capture. His eyes moved quickly, like a man scanning for weaknesses. By the time he sent a glass of champagne my way with nothing more than a nod, I had already decided to keep my distance. But Blake Harrington didn't like the word no. 2 weeks later, we were having dinner at Le Bernardin, and 2 months after that, he was proposing on a yacht off the coast of Capri. People whispered about his past wives even before the ring was on my finger. 4 marriages. 4 abrupt endings. None lasting longer than a year. The tabloids had a field day every time, spinning tales of irreconcilable differences, mutual separations, and personal decisions. But the details were always missing. The women disappeared from the public eye, sometimes even from their own families. No interviews. No memoirs. Not even a bitter Instagram post. It was as if they'd been erased. My friends called me insane. Alex, you know no one lasts with him, Melissa had said over coffee, her brow creased with genuine worry. There are rumors. Weird rumors. What kind of rumors? I pressed. She glanced around the cafe like someone might be listening. Some say he's controlling. Others say that mansion of his in the Hamptons is cursed. I don't know. But people vanish, Alex. They vanish. I should have listened. Instead, I told myself I was different. And maybe I was. Because I wasn't stepping into Blake's world blind, I had a reason to be there. A personal reason. The wedding was small but dripping with luxury. 30 guests, vintage Dom Perignon, a string quartet flown in from Vienna. The moment we exchanged vows, the cameras flashed, and I felt the invisible chains tighten around my wrists. Blake's mansion in East Hampton was breathtaking in that cold, museum-like way. White marble floors that echoed when you walked. Walls lined with oil paintings of people whose eyes seemed to follow you. Security everywhere, though I never saw their faces clearly. The first week felt almost normal. Breakfasts together on the terrace, evening walks through the manicured gardens, laughter by the fire. But the warmth didn't last. By the second week, Blake's smile had cooled, and his tone carried an edge. The rules began, where I could go, who I could talk to, when I should be home. I didn't argue, not yet. Instead, I observed. Because beneath the surface, I could feel the pulse of something far darker. Something the world had never seen. It was in the way the staff avoided meeting my eyes. In the way the doors to certain rooms were always locked. In the way Blake sometimes disappeared at night, returning with the scent of saltwater clinging to his coat. I told myself to stay calm, to keep playing the perfect wife. I smiled at charity luncheons. I wore the gowns he chose for me. I let him believe I was falling into the same quiet obedience that must have swallowed the women before me. But I wasn't. I was watching. Waiting. And I knew, deep in my bones, that sooner or later, I'd find out why no wife ever lasted with Blake Harrington. And when I did, I wasn't going to run. I was going to do the one thing none of them had ever dared. By the time I'd been in Blake's world for a month, I had pieced together the outline of the pattern, at least the version the public knew. His first wife, Victoria Lane, had been a fashion editor in Paris. They married after a 6-month romance that lit up the gossip columns. By month 8, She had vanished. No press conference, no public divorce filing. Just gone. Her family claimed she was traveling indefinitely and refused further comment. The second, Charlotte Avery, was an Olympic equestrian. She lasted less than a year before retreating to a remote villa in Italy, where she stopped competing altogether. Her old teammates refused to talk about her, and her social media accounts evaporated. Then came Natalie Brooks, a Broadway actress with a laugh like champagne fizz. The night she left him, she reportedly called her sister from a payphone in tears. The next day, she was in Switzerland. The sister hasn't spoken publicly since. And then there was Elise Warner, the most recent before me. A corporate attorney with the sharpest mind I'd ever seen. She was gone in 6 months. Rumor had it she tried to sue him, but no court records exist. The tabloids loved to speculate, spinning theories like cotton candy. Some claimed Blake was impossible, controlling, jealous, prone to fits of temper. Others painted the wives as gold diggers who ran when the novelty wore off. And then there was the mansion theory, the whispers that the house itself had a presence, a weight that pressed down on anyone who stayed there too long. I kept a scrapbook of the articles, hidden in the bottom drawer of my vanity. Not for sentimentality, but for reference. I wanted to know their faces, to see if there were clues in their eyes, some unspoken warning. And I wanted to remember what I was here to do. Blake's public life was immaculate. His name appeared in Forbes, Architectural Digest, GQ. Photographs of him with senators, movie stars, tech giants. But behind the glossy covers, I started noticing cracks. At dinner parties, he would steer conversations with surgical precision, cutting off topics he didn't like. At home, his questions became invasions. Where were you at 3:17 p.m.? Why did you text Melissa twice today? Who was that man you smiled at in the market? He said it all with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, like a chess master planning his next 3 moves. One night, I found myself standing in the West Wing hallway, staring at a locked door. It had an old-fashioned brass handle, polished to a mirror shine, and a keyhole that seemed almost watched. When I asked Blake about it, his answer was smooth. Just storage. Antique pieces that need restoration. But his hand tightened slightly on my arm as he guided me away. The staff were another puzzle. They moved like ghosts, efficient, silent, never in the same room for long. The housekeeper, Mrs. Lowell, kept her eyes fixed on the floor when she brought me tea. Once, as she turned to leave, I asked her how long she'd worked here. Her hands froze. "Too long," she said softly, and then she was gone before I could press further. It was easy to imagine how the other wives might have unraveled here. The constant surveillance. The creeping sense that the walls had ears. The realization that every step you took was within a boundary you hadn't agreed to. But I wasn't unraveling. I was charting the boundaries. I was testing them, slowly, subtly. If I was to survive this place, I had to understand it first. Blake noticed my stillness and seemed almost pleased by it. Perhaps he mistook my quiet for submission. He started taking me to more public events, gallery openings, political fundraisers, private yacht dinners. In public, he was the perfect husband, his hand warm on my back, his laugh deep and genuine. But I noticed how he always positioned me, never too close to someone for too long, never left unattended. Once, at a fundraiser in Boston, I slipped into a conversation with a man I recognized from the financial pages. Harold Strickland, CEO of a major investment firm. We were discussing art when Blake appeared beside me, his arm circling my waist like a claim. "Harold," he said with a tight smile, "I see you've met my wife. She has a fascination with old stories." His eyes flicked to mine, and in that moment, I realized he wasn't talking about art. Back at the mansion, I opened my scrapbook again. Each face stared back at me, and I imagined them walking these same marble halls, hearing these same locked doors click shut, feeling the same invisible leash tightening. And one by one, they'd left, or been removed. But that was the difference between them and me. I wasn't here to be removed. I wasn't even here for Blake. I was here for Elise Warner. And I intended to find out what happened to her, no matter what it cost me. From the moment the vows were spoken, I understood I wasn't like the others. Blake didn't marry me because I was the most beautiful or the most accomplished, though he said those things often. He married me because I played my part flawlessly. And I married him because I had a plan. The red flags came early, but I welcomed them like signposts on a map. The late-night phone calls in his study that stopped abruptly when I entered. The precise way he arranged objects on his desk, as if disorder offended him personally. The sudden silences at dinner when I mentioned anything about my past work as an investigative journalist. "Darling," he said one night, his fork poised mid-air, "there's no need for you to keep that pace anymore. You're my wife now. You can relax." I smiled sweetly and nodded, letting him believe I was melting into his version of domestic bliss. But inside, I was sharpening my focus. The warning from my friend Melissa echoed in my mind. No one lasts with him. She hadn't known my true motive. No one did. Before Elise Warner vanished from the public eye, she had contacted me anonymously. Her message was brief: "If something happens to me, it's because of him. Don't let it end with me." We had never met in person, but she had fed me fragments, details about his business practices, odd occurrences at the mansion, hints of a hidden room. And then, silence. So when Blake's proposal came, an opportunity one could hardly have orchestrated better, I said yes. Not for love. Not for money. For Elise. I began my marriage the way an undercover operative begins a mission. Blending in. I learned his habits: morning coffee at precisely 7:10, a fondness for vintage cufflinks, the way his mood shifted when certain names came up. I noted when he left the house without telling me, and which staff disappeared at the same time. I made small mistakes on purpose, asking about the locked West Wing door twice in 1 week just to gauge his reaction. In public, we were a dream. Magazines called us the couple to watch. At charity galas in Manhattan, I'd stand on his arm while photographers captured our smiles. At home, the air was colder. He would watch me without speaking, his gaze as heavy as stone. The first time I noticed the cameras, I was in the library, scanning a shelf for a book to read before bed. A glint in the corner caught my eye: a lens, small and almost invisible against the dark wood. I began looking for them in other rooms and found them. Discreet, expertly hidden, and always angled toward spaces where I spent time. When I asked him about them casually over breakfast, he smiled. "For your safety," he said. "You're the most precious thing in this house." His tone was warm, but his eyes held no warmth at all. I didn't flinch. Instead, I began keeping a private journal, not in writing, but in my mind. Every detail, every oddity, stored like evidence. One evening, while Blake was in the city for a board meeting, I wandered into the garden under the pretense of fresh air. Mrs. Lowell, the housekeeper, was trimming roses near the trellis. I thanked her for the tea she'd brought earlier and asked if she enjoyed working here. Her answer was a whisper: "We all do what we must to survive." She didn't meet my eyes. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, realizing I was getting closer to the edge of something dangerous. The mansion wasn't just a home, it was a machine. Every person, every lock, every camera served a purpose. And Blake was the engineer. The closer I got to the truth, the more I felt him tightening his control. Unannounced visits to wherever I went. Sudden gifts meant to distract, diamond earrings, a trip to Aspen. Each one was beautiful, expensive, and calculated. I wore the earrings to dinner the night I decided to push him. I asked about Elise. Just a passing remark, as though I'd read about her in an old article. His fork paused, just for a second, then he smiled. "She left. It wasn't for her," he said, returning to his meal. But his jaw was tight, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or anger. That flicker told me two things. 1, Elise had been right. 2, if I wasn't careful, I'd join her fate. Still, I didn't back off. Because if I wanted to uncover Blake Harrington's deepest secret, I had to get close enough to touch it. And once I did, I knew I'd have only one chance to do the unthinkable. It happened on a Thursday evening in late September, the kind of night when the sky looked like bruised velvet and the wind carried a sharp chill. Blake suggested we have dinner in the library, a deviation from his usual preference for the formal dining room. I smiled and agreed, though my pulse quickened. Change in his routine meant opportunity in mine. Midway through the main course, his phone buzzed. He excused himself with a kiss to my temple and strode down the corridor toward the west wing. The wing with the locked door. The wing I'd been waiting to enter since the day I moved in. I gave him 30 seconds, just enough time to be out of earshot. Then I slipped from my chair, my heels whispering against the marble floor, and made my way down the dimly lit hallway. The door stood there like a sentinel, polished brass handle gleaming. From the hem of my dress, I pulled the slender lockpick I'd sewn in weeks ago. Years of investigative work had taught me to be prepared, even in silk. The tumblers surrendered quickly, less than a minute. I eased the door open, my breath catching at the sudden drop in temperature. Inside, the room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, each with a name in Blake's precise handwriting. Victoria. Charlotte. Natalie. Elise. My hands hovered before settling on Elise's. Inside were photographs, her walking through Central Park, sitting at a cafe, sleeping in bed. Typed transcripts of her private phone calls. Copies of her emails. And at the bottom, a contract. The language was cold and clinical, but its meaning was clear: she had agreed to disappear. No public statements, no contact with family or friends, no lawsuits. I swallowed hard and moved to the next file, then the next. They were all the same: surveillance, pressure, legal entrapment. Every marriage had ended not with a divorce, but with erasure. I was about to leave when my gaze caught a fresh label. Alexandra Pierce. My own name. The folder was thin, but it was enough to turn my stomach. A few photographs, me in the garden, me on the phone, me asleep. Financial documents. And a handwritten note: accelerate process. She's getting close. For a moment, the room seemed to tilt. I forced my breathing to slow, slipped the pendant from around my neck, and quietly snapped photographs of every page I could. The pendant wasn't jewelry, it was a micro camera, feeding the images directly to an encrypted cloud. I replaced everything exactly as I found it and relocked the door, my fingers trembling only when I was back in the hallway. By the time Blake returned, I was sitting in the library again, swirling my wine as if nothing had happened. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I formed the plan that would shatter his fortress. The following evening, we attended a high-profile charity gala in Manhattan. I wore the diamond earrings he'd given me, smiling like the perfect wife. While he worked the crowd, I quietly positioned myself near the stage. When the microphone passed to me, under the pretense of announcing a donation, I began speaking. I didn't name him at first. I talked about hidden abuse, about control masked as protection, about women who vanish not because they choose to, but because they're made to. Then I said his name. I described the files, the photographs, the contracts. The room froze. Guests turned toward Blake, their expressions shifting from admiration to suspicion. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire. Security started moving toward me, but I knew it was already too late. The images from my pendant had been sent to 3 journalists I trusted, scheduled to publish within minutes. For the first time since I'd known him, Blake's eyes showed something other than control. They showed fear. I left the gala amid a storm of questions, sliding into a waiting car before anyone could stop me. By morning, the headlines had consumed every major outlet. Billionaire's secretive marriages exposed. The mansion was surrounded by reporters, and Blake's empire had begun to crack. I'd done the unthinkable. And I'd done it for every woman whose name sat in those cabinets, including my own. The morning after the gala, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating endlessly on the nightstand. Journalists. Former colleagues. People I hadn't heard from in years. The story had gone global overnight, front pages in New York, London, Toronto, Sydney. Blake's photograph was everywhere, but it wasn't the glossy, perfect image the world was used to. It was a candid shot from the gala, his face frozen mid-expression, somewhere between rage and disbelief. My inbox overflowed with messages from women, some I knew, most I didn't, thanking me for speaking out. A few were survivors of their own quiet wars, women who had been made to disappear in smaller, less public ways. Others were former staff from Blake's world, confirming details I had guessed at but never proved. It was overwhelming, and yet, it made every risk I'd taken worth it. Blake's legal team moved fast, issuing statements about misunderstandings and fabrications, but the damage was already done. The photographs of those files, the contracts, the surveillance, it was too much for him to spin. And when Elise's sister stepped forward, confirming the last time she'd spoken to Elise was the night she tried to confront Blake, public opinion shifted from curiosity to fury. Within days, his board forced him to step down from 2 of his companies. Major investors pulled their funding. The Hamptons mansion, his fortress, became a feeding ground for cameras and microphones. I knew I couldn't stay in New York. Not yet. So I booked a flight to Vancouver under my maiden name and left the city before dawn. From the window seat, I watched the skyline fade, wondering if he was watching too. Wondering if he was already plotting his next move. In Vancouver, I kept my head down. I rented a small apartment overlooking the harbor, wrote in longhand, and met only with people I trusted completely. A publishing house in Toronto offered me an advance for a memoir, but I wasn't ready, not while his influence still lingered in shadowy corners. The strangest part was the silence from him. No threats. No messages. But I knew Blake Harrington wasn't a man who surrendered. If he was quiet, it meant he was thinking. Some nights, I'd dream of the locked door, of the cold air on my skin, of my name written in his sharp, deliberate hand. I'd wake up with the same thought. I'd escaped, but I hadn't finished. Because the truth was, the files I'd seen weren't everything. There had been cabinets I never opened. Names I didn't recognize. Stories that still belonged to shadows. The world now knew Blake Harrington's charm was a mask, but masks have a way of being repainted. And I had no intention of letting him rebuild his. I don't know when I'll make my move again, months, years, but I will. For the women who vanished before me. For the ones who might still be out there. And for myself. Because I didn't just survive Blake Harrington. I beat him once. And when the time comes, I'll do it again. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment and share. See you again in our next video.